Okay, so thanks for joining us, everybody. Let's get started. First of all, for some of you, this may be the first sessions you have attended at Beyond the Application. So welcome. I'm Barun from Turnkey, and I'll be your host today. Many of you will know who we are, but for those that don't, Turnkey is a specialist risk management, application security, and cybersecurity company. We provide business consulting, implementation, and management services to help customers safeguard their application environments, covering both SAP and non-SAP systems. We have collected a few questions before today's sessions, which we will run through at the end. However, if you would like to ask a question, then please feel free to comment on this page and we'll get back to you. So I'm now going to introduce today's guest. Parag Devdar is Information Security Director for Asia Pacific region at VF Corporation. I'll let Parag introduce himself in more detail once we hand over to him. Today, Parag will be exploring the evolution and impact of ransomware, threat actors and their attack vectors, and strategies to protect, defend, and respond to these attacks. So I think we are all set to get underway. Parag, if you're ready, I'll hand over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Barun. Thanks to you and Turnkey for inviting me today for this session. Uh, Hello, everyone. My name is Parag Devdar, and as Varun mentioned, I'm the Director for Information Security at VF Corporation for Asia Pacific region. I've been in the information security industry for over 20 years now, and I've worked with various companies like KPMG, Tech Mahindra, and the AXA Group as well. So today I'm going to talk about ransomware, as Varun mentioned. So let's get started with that. Ransomware, the digital pandemic. So if you look at this map, you might get confused whether it's the map of the COVID pandemic. Well, not really. This is the map of the WannaCry ransomware, which struck the world in 2017. This also looks like a pandemic, right? So the map looks very similar to the COVID pandemic map, and that's the reason why I'm calling this the digital pandemic. So WannaCry ransomware impacted more than 150 countries, and 360,000 devices were attacked by the ransomware. The world faced over $4 billion of loss in this particular attack. And this was just the start of the pandemic. There have been numerous attacks after that, and we'll talk a little bit more of all the attacks. But the recent one is the Reveal attack, which has just happened a month ago. And this attack is the single largest ransomware attack so far. And if you look at the ransom demand is now stands at $70 million. And this has impacted, again, so many countries. This attack was a supply chain based attack, and the threat actors, that group was called Reveal. What they did was they attacked the Kaseya virtual system administrator software, which is used by managed service providers. Now, the threat actors managed to exploit a zero-day vulnerability in the Kaseya VSA servers. They bypassed the authentication or the web panel and executed commands to deploy the ransomware payload to all the connected clients of the MSPs, which means they were able to scale that attack exponentially. So there were about 30 MSPs which were using this Kaseya servers, and there were about 100 or 1,000 businesses across the world which were impacted in this attack. So all these customers who were connected to the affected VSA servers, they received the malicious VSA agent hotfix pack, which was nothing but the virus payload or the ransomware payload. And the ransomware was able to overcome the antivirus protections by leveraging the flawed versions of the Microsoft Defender applications. And since the MSPs rather, the managed service providers had administrative access into most of these networks, it was easy for the virus to proliferate and propagate across the networks. So in this case, more than 1 million individual devices were encrypted and frozen out of operation. The actors are asking for ransom of anywhere between 25,000 to 5 million per victim per company if they want to pay separately. But soon they got bored of this, talking to so many different customers, and hence, they came out with a global fix saying we will, give us $70 million and we will provide the encryption keys to everyone. And Revil has attacked not only this Kaseya, but also they have attacked Apple supplier and have stolen product designs. They extorted 11 million recently from JBS, which is a meat package producer or packager in the US. And recently, after government intervention, this group has become inactive. But the challenge is that now for the victims, there's no one to contact for the decryption keys. So the victims are now stuck. Now, a few days ago, a few months ago, in fact, one of the journalist was able to get an interview with this Revil ransomware operators. And this is a very interesting interview, and I would urge you all to have a look at this interview and see what they think, what the thought process of these threat actors is. But one of the points which they mentioned in this was their biggest attacks were TravelX, Grubman, and Texas, 23 counties in the US. And I'll take you through some of the other points what they mentioned in their interview as well. So what is the severity of this ransomware pandemic? Today, 23% of all cyber attacks across the world are ransomware attacks. And these ransomware attacks are not sparing anyone. Right? They are industry-wide. They are going across the world, across industries. So it impacts professional services, insurance, manufacturing, financial services, even the NHS, which is the health services in the UK, that was impacted some time ago. Right? And there has been an exponential increase in the ransomware attacks during the COVID pandemic. Some time back, there was the Colonial Pipeline in the US, which was attacked and which caused fuel outages across the southeast region of the United States. And you can see how many fuel pumps were impacted and ran out of fuel in these four states in the map. On the right side, you will see the transportation in Germany, which was impacted. The train services in Germany were impacted by ransomware attacks. And now the ransomware actors, they have come out with a new strategy called the double extortion strategy. And almost 59% of all the ransomware attacks now use this strategy. And we'll talk a little bit more about this strategy later. The recent Revil attack, or the threat actor is also called the Sodinokebi, their profits last year was $123 million. So you can see the extent of the ransomware pandemic. And the losses keep mounting. With every attack, the ransom amount is just going up and up. So in the Brentag case, the ransom was 4.4 million, which went up in the Colonial Pipeline case. They paid about $5 million. And JBS Foods, they paid $11 million. Whereas Quanta, Acer, their ransom demand was $50 million, right? So the ransom demands are just mounting, the losses are mounting, and the ransomware threat actors are getting bolder by the day and asking for more and more ransom. So what are the different type of ransomware attacks? So initially there was just the blocker ransomware, where the ransomware used to lock out only the basic computer functions. That is denying access to your desktop by partially disabling the files which the computer uses to boot the computer. You could still use your computer, but that was only to pay the ransom. This locker malware basically avoids encrypting critical files. And in this case, there's less chance of total data destruction. But this was the old attack. The recent attacks, what we are seeing, which encrypts all the critical data, including documents, photos, videos, and it leaves the basic computer functions untouched. In this case, the crypto creators, they include a countdown in the ransom demand. So if you don't pay by that deadline, it's generally 48 to 72 hours. But if you don't pay by that deadline, then all your files get destructed. The recent attack, and the one which I talked about on the earlier slide, was the double extortion scheme or the strategy. In this case, what the actors do is they exfiltrate the data before encrypting it. This means that if the company refuses to pay, or if they say, okay, we have backup available, we will restore from the backup, then the threat actors, they can leak the information online on the dark web or sell it to the highest bidders. In this case, even if the company has a backup or data recovery plans, those are not really useful because there's also data exfiltration which has happened. Also, the threat actors are now multiplying their attack with the DDoS attack, the distributed denial of service attack, along with the ransomware. In this case, any moves to back up the encrypted areas of the network, it becomes more difficult for the victims because of the DDoS attacks. And the DDoS attacks put more pressure on the victims to pay up. There is also the destructive ransomware. In this case, this is mainly used by nation state actors. And this is designed to destroy the digital assets and data rather than release them or encrypt them. In this case, the ransomware just wipes the system components or corrupt the data and render the enterprises or even public utility services inoperable. This is used, as I said, by the nation state actors, but recent ransomware attacks include wiper elements to increase the pressure on the victims also. So there are two types of attacks. So there is a ransomware attack, which is generic, which is, it's meant for the general public, anybody or everybody. And there are many victims in this, and the ransom demand is generally lower. But now there are targeted attacks as well on specific organizations. And in this case, specific organizations are targeted, and multiple devices of this organization are targeted, where the victims are few organizations, but the ransom demand is very high. It's in the last case, it was $50 million. Just like the COVID pandemic, the COVID virus, we are seeing a number of variants and waves of this digital pandemic as well. So on the left-hand side, you will see the names of different variants which have come up over the past few years. And these are just few names. There are so many different variants, new variants, which keep on coming, right? Some of the most famous, was the Petya, not Petya, the WannaCry, the Tesla Crypt, and the Crypto Wall, and so on. And on this side, you will see the ransomware activity by the variant. So in Q1 21, these were all the viruses which were active. And as I said, there are waves of these viruses, so they don't stop after a particular period. So they just keep on coming. So in this case, if you see the Revil attack, it happened every quarter for the past 5 quarters. So there are waves of these attacks happening, just like the COVID attack or the COVID pandemic. So now let's look at the evolution. How has ransomware evolved over the last few years? So it has evolved from a consumer level nuisance of fake antivirus products to the recent sophisticated malware, what we are seeing with advanced encryption capabilities. It started way back in 1989 with the AIDS Trojan, where Dr. Joseph Pop, he distributed floppy disks at a convention of doctors. And when the doctors used these floppy disks, their machines got encrypted, and they had to mail across a check of $189 to get their devices active again. Over a period of time, the malware has evolved, and the ransom demands have also gone up. Around 2006, the malware started using 1024-bit encryption, which was the latest. And recently, we are seeing the 2048-bit encryption, the AES and ECC encryption as well. In 2015, that is when the double extortion scheme sort of came up with the Chimera variant of ransomware. And it is not just the Windows-based systems which are impacted. In 2016, we saw a macOS variant of the ransomware as well. There's also the mobile ransomware. So Android devices have also been impacted. iOS devices have also been impacted by the ransomware. Around 2019, we saw the emergence of ransomware as a service. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this ransomware as a service and how this works later in this presentation. In 2020, the double extortion scheme became more famous, and we are seeing now almost 59% of all attacks are having the double extortion strategy. The most recent one, it is named after the coronavirus. This variant is Corona 9A. So this is the latest variant which we have observed in the past few days. So what is the attack path of the ransomware? So if you look at how this works, how the actors work, they first start with the reconnaissance activity. So in a targeted attack, they will do a deep research on their target, the target organization, to see whether the companies are making enough revenues to pay the ransom, whether the organization has a cyber insurance policy which will help pay the ransom. They will also look at the impact severity, which means if the organization is a public utility company like the Colonial Pipeline or the health services, etc., it's more likely that they will pay up. So once they find this target, once they have done an analysis and they have identified their target, that is when they will start the attack. The first step of that attack is gaining access into the system. And how do they gain access? So they have to gain access by getting credentials. And they can get credentials either through phishing attacks, which is the most popular attack. And we are seeing so many phishing attacks happening in this the coronavirus pandemic as well. There are brute forcing of passwords, or exploiting misconfigured access, or compromising the RDP, which is the remote desktop protocol access. So this is how the threat actors get access, the first access, initial access into the organization. Once they get access, then they have to maintain that access. And they do it by planting a backdoor, which means even if someone changes the passwords, they still have access using that backdoor. Once they are inside the organization, they will keep observing the business operations. They will see where the backups are getting stored. They will traverse the network. They will do lateral movements across different servers. They'll try and find all the online backups. They can maintain access, or they can sell this access to other criminal groups in case they are operating a ransomware as a service. So once they have maintained this access, that is when they will start encrypting and destroying the backups. So they will identify and destroy all the backups. They will delete the backups. They will propagate across the compromised networks and also encrypt the online backups. So even if the backup is on a cloud or in a different location, they will try to find that and encrypt that backup. Now, after they have destroyed or encrypted the backups, the next step is data exfiltration. So they will exfiltrate sensitive information and before they will go to the next step of encrypting the systems. And this is the double extortion strategy. So here they will force the victim organization to pay the ransom by threatening disclosure. And this tactic is known as doxing. So once they have exfiltrated that data and they have it with them, that is when they will start encrypting the files. So they will connect to the command and control server and obtain the keys. So they will send the keys to the target organization, the encryption keys, and they will encrypt as many files and systems as possible on the target network to cripple the organization. Once they have encrypted the files and systems, that is when they will ask for the ransom. So they will demand the ransom and ask for bitcoins or Monero currency, cryptocurrency, because that way it is not, they will not be found. And once they are paid, only then they may release the key for that specific victim. So in most cases, the keys are also different. It's meant for specific victims. And what the actors also do, they will clean all the evidence of the malware from the network once the ransom is paid, because they do not want the security consultants to come in, obtain that evidence, and be able to find them or be able to create solutions or decryptors for the ransomware. So the ransomware threat actors, they will encrypt over 150 different types of files, including Microsoft Office, PDF files, PST files, all kinds of databases or compressed files, etc. So which are the attack vectors which they used? And I talked briefly about that. So initially, they used USB sticks to share files, malicious files, and malicious macros using the USB files. But the more common attack is a phishing or the social engineering attack, where malware installation happens when a gullible end customer or a consumer clicks on a malicious link and downloads the malware onto his laptop or desktop. The phishing is also used for credential gathering, and that can be then used either for brute force or the RDP compromise attacks. So as I was saying in their interview, the REvil actors said the best vector for them is the RDP, which is the remote desktop protocol. In this attack, what they do is the remote desktop protocol, which is exposed to the internet, and if it is not protected adequately by MFA or strong authentication, then that can be exploited due to unpatched vulnerabilities or password guessing or the credentials which have been gathered in phishing attacks. And that protocol is exploited to gain access into the systems. There's another attack called the drive-by download, where the end customer or the user, if he's visiting a compromised website using an unpatched or an old browser, then that old browser may be exploited to download the malware into the machine. There are also the free software vectors, where free software or freeware is a lure used by the threat actors. So the users may download some free software or a free online malware scanning service, or it could be games, it could be screensavers, or something which will attract the end customers. And once they download the file, it is infected. It has the malware embedded into it, and that will encrypt the files or attack the organization. Finally, we have seen the supply chain attacks. In this case, the Kaseya VSA server, that was a classic case of the supply chain attack. But apart from that, there are other ways of impacting organizations using vulnerable systems or other supply chain mechanisms, like Citrix application delivery controllers or Pulse Secure VPN, etc. So again, in the interview, REvil talked about their top two attacks were through the old Pulsar and Citrix systems. They said they got access to the entire network only in 3 minutes, and just because of one vulnerability, and it was unpatched. So it's as simple as that for the threat actors to get access into the network for if you have any unpatched or vulnerable software in your systems. So now let's talk about the ransomware as a service. So these actors now are operating more like corporates. So initially they were acting alone, and they could have only a limited attack surface or limited targets. So to increase, just like a corporation will use franchisees to increase their sales or increase their operation across the world. Now these ransomware actors are also using the same technique. So they have started ransomware as a service. In this case, there are three main actors: the ransomware operators who own this software, who create this ransomware software. But they use the affiliates. They sell this as a service to the affiliates, who then attack different organizations. And these affiliates use initial access brokers who provide them with the credentials. So, there's kind of segregation of their work which happens, and all three then share the ransom. So all of them get some part of the ransom, once they are able to actually penetrate an organization and get the ransom. So this helps them operate a scalable business by reducing the pressure on the developers. So they use the classic model of outsourcing some of their activities, right? So again, in the Revel interview, they said RAS model is more profitable for them, and they pay about 70 to 80% of the ransom, which they get from the victims to the affiliates, because the affiliates are the one who do most of the work. The operators basically provide them with the platform and the software. And what they also do is they do the negotiation part with the victim, and also provide any other help which the affiliates require. So this is ransomware as a service, which is becoming more and more popular. Now, ransomware does not affect only the Windows-based systems. We are seeing the rise of the mobile ransomware. It came a few years ago, but we are seeing this now increasing day by day. And this is increasing because of the increasing dependence on mobile phones for work, right? So many of the, especially in the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, we are seeing BYOD, the bring your own device phenomenon. We are seeing personal mobile devices, personal laptops being used, and hence the risk of ransomware is more. So employees are accessing sensitive office information or organization information from their mobile devices via either the corporate Wi-Fi or unsecured Wi-Fi, their home Wi-Fi, or they could be working from anywhere, from coffee shops, etc. So there have been reports of about 60,000 ransomware trojans across 150 different countries being found. So over 4.2 million American mobile users have suffered ransomware attacks, as per one of the reports. I think a few years ago, there was a major attack on Android phones with the scare package ransomware, and 900,000 Android phones were hit by ransomware attacks in just a month. So we're seeing the extent of the mobile ransomware also increasing day by day. So now let's look at strategies on how do organizations defend themselves from this pandemic, from this ransomware attack, right? So there are multiple frameworks available, but one of the most popular framework is the NIST cybersecurity framework. And there are 5 sort of pillars of this framework, which is identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So this is a good framework, and this is available on the MITRE.org website, where they have made this specifically for ransomware defense. So they have the how do you identify the critical processes, the systems on which the organization depends, which are vulnerable to ransomware. They can identify the crown jewels. They can identify different techniques of ransomware and what techniques they are vulnerable to. The next step is to protect yourself using different techniques again. What techniques, and we'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide on how to protect yourself from ransomware attacks. The next pillar is the detect pillar, where how do you detect the ransomware activities? How do you detect malware if it is coming into your organization? What kind of cyber threat intelligence do you need, and so on. And if you do get impacted by ransomware, then how do you respond? That's the next pillar. So there are different ways of responding to ransomware. And again, we'll talk a little bit more detail later on. And the final step is recovery. How do you recover from a ransomware attack if you are impacted? And what kind of preparedness response do you need? What kind of exercises you need to be prepared with, etc. So I would urge you to look at this MITRE.org website, where you can get details on this ransomware defense framework. But the first step, the identify phase, is the first phase is to do a ransomware risk assessment for your organization. Now, there's a very good ransomware readiness assessment checklist provided by the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. They have recently released this new module as part of its cybersecurity evaluation tool. Now, this tool is available for both IT and OT systems. It's a self-assessment tool based on a set of practices to help organizations assess their risk to ransomware, right? And it helps organizations evaluate their cybersecurity posture with respect to ransomware, and also against recognized standards and best practices like the NIST framework. This assessment will also guide the asset owners and operators through a systematic process to evaluate the network security practices against the threat ransomware attacks. And it also provides a very good dashboard with graphs and tables which can present the results to your management. So how do you protect yourself, right? So prevention is always better than cure. So there are ways to prevent yourself. So first thing is to reduce your attack surface. You need to segment your networks. Make sure you limit your personal devices being used to access corporate information. And if they are using, your employees and associates are using personal devices, then make sure they are secure at least. Disable unnecessary ports and services like the RDP port, definitely something to be on the lookout for. You need to continuously patch all your vulnerabilities, all your systems, because 0 days, they keep on coming, and these vulnerabilities are exploited by the ransomware threat actors. The next step is proper access control. So you need to deploy strong access control, multi-factor authentication, and privileged access management, because the first step which the ransomware actors take is to gain access, gain credentials of systems. You need to deploy the principle of least privilege. You need to whitelist IPs. So if there are your partners who are accessing or associates who are accessing your networks, then whitelist their IPs, known IPs only. Use the zero trust principle. So even if your associates, they are known associates coming in from outside the organization, use the zero trust framework to identify and authenticate them before you give them access. Make sure you restrict write permissions to your databases so that the ransomware threat actors are not able to encrypt these databases. Detection and continuous monitoring. You need to keep monitoring, and there are SIEM tools available, endpoint response EDR tools available, IDS and IPS available, which you can deploy to monitor your network continuously. You need to also deploy threat intelligence to understand if your organization is being targeted by these threat actors specifically. Obviously, the phishing controls, web and email protection controls are they are the basic requirements. When it comes to backup and DR, you need to take frequent backups and make sure these backups are protected. Even online backups can be encrypted, as we saw earlier. So make sure your backups are immutable, and there are also offline backups taken. So these cannot be reached by the ransomware actors. Make sure you're testing your backups regularly, because if you need to recover the backups at the, if you're attacked, then you should be ready for that as well. Also make sure you have the right data protection tools in place and a framework in place. You need to do the data discovery and classify your data to identify what is confidential data, what is the critical data, sensitive data within your organization, and deploy data leakage prevention tools. Make sure you encrypt your confidential and sensitive data so that even if it is exfiltrated, it does not matter. Or make sure the keys for this encryption, are protected adequately. You need to have your incident response in place. You should have a contract with the incident response service provider who can help you in case of an attack. and we'll talk about how to do incident response a little bit more in detail later. But the most important, the important part of this is the user awareness, because these users, are the ones who are sort of the weakest link in the whole chain, and they are the ones who are exploited. They are the ones who give away credentials in phishing attacks. They are the ones who click on malicious links unknowingly, and hence the user awareness and training is the most important part of the protection pillar. So when it comes to incident response, and especially in this COVID situation, when you are working in the new normal scenario, where most of your associates may be working from home, or even your service providers may be working from home. So this is where you need to think through how your organization would deal with a ransomware incident if it does happen, right? So think about it in advance. Review your ransomware incident playbooks. Assess if an alternate incident response coordination and collaboration mechanism is required if your standard conferencing systems or your devices are disrupted by ransomware. If your remote working devices are encrypted, then how are you going to provide new devices or enable BYOD access for external users or partners? You need to plan your recovery sequence for servers to ensure that key business processes can be brought up and running as soon as possible. You need to practice your incident drills while working remotely, right? So because you may not be able to get into office to actually do these drills, so you have to practice this also remotely. And we'll talk a little bit more about the ransom payments also. But make sure you have a cyber incident response partner available, a firm available who can help you with the incident response and help you recover. Now, in many cases, whether to pay the ransom or not, that becomes the moot question. And you don't know, what will happen if you pay and what will happen if you don't. Because many organizations who have been attacked in the past and who have paid have not got the decryption keys or their data was corrupted. So even after paying the ransom, there's no guarantee that you will get your data back. In many cases, the organizations who paid ransom, they got attacked once again. So there's no guarantee that you will not get attacked once you have paid the ransom. There's also no guarantee that your data won't still be sold online, especially in a double extortion attack after you have paid the ransom. You need to think, what is the regulatory and legal position for your organization? In some cases, in some countries, paying ransom may be illegal. The law enforcement authorities always say that you should not pay the ransom. So who makes that decision within your organization? You need to think about that. Do you have a security committee who will make that decision? Is the decision with the senior management? Is the board of directors going to get involved to make this decision? Will you report to law enforcement or not? Because if you report to the law enforcement, then you have to abide by their guidelines as well. And in some cases, they may advise you not to pay the ransom, and then you may get stuck. You may not be able to recover your data as well. Who will negotiate with the threat actors? Do you have a team? Do you have an incident response partner in place who will negotiate with threat actors, or is it your team who's going to negotiate? If you do decide to pay the ransom, how will you pay? Because the ransomware threat actors, they generally demand to be paid in bitcoins or cryptocurrencies. And most of the organizations will not have cryptocurrencies available to pay. So they have to arrange these cryptocurrencies at short notice. What is going to be the external communication strategy? Your communications team has to be involved, because there will be, news. If the ransomware threat actors make it known, then your organization name will be on the front pages on the newspapers the next day. So what is going to be your external communication strategy? Now, do you have cyber insurance? And even if you do have cyber insurance, not all costs may be covered by cyber insurance. For instance, recently, some of the cyber insurance firms have taken a stance not to cover ransom payments. Or in some cases, they may cover only some of the recovery costs. Not all recovery costs may be covered by the cyber insurance. So how are you going to manage paying that ransom or getting back into business? So all these are questions which you need to think through before the ransomware attack happens. Now again, Revil disclosed in their interview that more than 1/3 of the organizations they attack make secret deals or payments with the threat actors. Now, is that the right way to do it? Maybe some of the it's reputation of the organizations at stake, and hence some of the organizations do not want their names to be splashed across newspapers the next day, and hence they make these secret deals. But that is something which is emboldening the threat actors more and more. So in this case, to fight this pandemic, we need all the heroes and superheroes across the world to come together and fight this virus, fight this ransomware. So in this case, there are around 40 countries' police and law enforcement agencies which have come together to fight this ransomware. And they have been joined by 100+ public and private organizations. They have created this website called No More Ransom. This was initiated by the National High-Tech Crime Unit of Netherlands Police, Europol's European Cybercrime Center, Kaspersky and McAfee, and with the goal to help the victims of ransomware retrieve their encrypted data without paying the criminals. Yeah, so this is the website created by the law enforcement and IT security companies. They have joined hands to fight this pandemic, and we need all of us, everybody across the world, all organizations to join hands to fight this pandemic, because this pandemic is otherwise going to go and grow. Just like the COVID pandemic, where every individual is required to be vaccinated, it is every individual's responsibility, to protect the world from this pandemic. Similarly, in this digital pandemic, also, it is everyone's responsibility to be aware, to protect themselves, and to protect their organizations, and help each other, to protect from this pandemic. So this is what I had to say, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Barun, once again for inviting me here. And maybe if there are some questions, we can go through questions now.
So thanks, Parag, once again. I think it was pretty comprehensive and pretty insightful. So I think, we all know and we all hear of ransomware these days on a regular basis. I think this session has helped us to understand the nitty-gritties, to understand how sophisticated and how organized this domain and this sector has become. So thanks a lot for that. And we do have some time for a few questions, and I'll probably start with one question, which is pretty similar to what we see with the COVID-19 pandemic. We are already talking about this pandemic moving into an endemic scenario. So I believe it's pretty similar with the ransomware also, where we expect that we have to learn to live with ransomware. So I just wanted to understand, I mean, what should be the going forward strategy in terms of dealing with ransomware as a not as a pandemic, but more as an endemic in nature?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at the evolution of ransomware, and the extent of this attacks, I think this is going to continue. It's going to be the new normal, as we call in during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So we need to learn to live with it, but at the same time, it is a nuisance. Once there are tools and there is protection available now. There are various ways. So as I mentioned, you could encrypt your data. You could make sure your backups are there, which are immutable and untouchable. So with this, organizations can be protected. However, it's definitely a nuisance. If it does happen, the ransomware attack does happen, it will have an impact on the organizations. It will have an impact, maybe on the lives of people if it's a public utility or health service, right? So that is something which we need to be careful of. And definitely, again, prevention is always better than cure. We need to be very, very careful. We need to be, just like the COVID pandemic, we are taking care. We are wearing masks, we are washing our hands, we are getting vaccinated. I think similarly in this pandemic also we need to make sure that we are getting protected. We are taking all the due care to prevent this attack in the first place.
Thanks, Parag. There's one more question before we can end this session, and that's around, we talked about this ransomware being probably targeted against all kind of companies, whether they are public, whether they are commercial organizations, different sectors, and so on. But are there some specific steps that organizations can take to make themselves less of a target against such ransomwares?
I think the first step, as I mentioned, is the risk assessment part. So every organization needs to assess their risk of getting attacked by this ransomware attack, right? So once they do this risk assessment, that will give them an understanding of where they stand and what is the probability and what could be the impact if they were attacked by ransomware. Once they know this impact, once they know this probability, I think then that is where they can take informed decision on what they need to do, how they need to protect themselves, what is the investment, what they need to do in cybersecurity. If they need partners, because all these are sophisticated attacks, as you mentioned, and not all organizations have the necessary bandwidth, the necessary skills, and the necessary resources to protect them fully, by themselves. So definitely, many of the organizations will need partners, will need external support, to help them in protecting themselves against these kind of attacks. And the risk assessment will help them understanding where they stand and then take the measures required, to protect themselves.
Thanks a lot, Parag. I really appreciate your time and thanks for joining us today. For everyone else, thanks a lot for joining us today. And please remember that there are other sessions which are still available for you to register from the forum website. And all of the previous sessions are also available on demand. So thanks again for listening today. If you'd like to get in touch, my details are on the screen. And Parag, thanks a lot once more for this very insightful session. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Varun. Bye.